You cannot destroy a people. You can destroy the individuals, you can destroy whole communities, but you cannot destroy a people. And that's why this war in Afghanistan will go on forever until there's some form of ceasefire and some forms of negotiations and some form of commitment by all outside powers to not be involved in Afghanistan.
You cannot defeat the Afghan people. As long as you fight the Afghan people, they take a pride. They will fight until they die, and they fight tooth and nail to make their country free and make the history.
For every resistance fighter we kill, we get 10 more. For every 2 we kill, 20 more. We cannot win. We're just digging a deeper and deeper hole. And yet, of course, from the point of view of the generals, they could never quit. They could never admit defeat.
It's not for nothing that Afghanistan was long known as the graveyard of empires. It was certainly the graveyard of the British Empire, it was the graveyard of the Soviet Empire, and it's been to many ways the graveyard of the US Empire.
These people have been fighting since 500 BC, somebody they've been fighting. And they've never been beaten. Never. We just have to have the leadership and the political will and resolve to say, look it, enough is enough. We, in my opinion, cannot continue with this. It's folly.
When do policymakers pay attention to this war and its moral obligations? Really, what good are we doing if we're going to keep fighting and we know every general has admitted, well, it's really hard to win it militarily, but we'll keep trying. It makes no sense.
If you don't start getting involved, this thing will go on. It's going to be 20 years. And again, the military-industrial complex is making billions of dollars on the back of our soldiers and Marines.
Another day, man. Another day.
The only decent thing to do is to withdraw. Now, it takes a great deal of courage to withdraw. It takes a great deal of courage to admit defeat.
Fire the hole!
The cost is over $1 trillion. $1 trillion, US dollars. The Department of Defense would tell you that it's about 84 to 85 billion dollars, just cranking year after year after year after year. It's, 2,500 young men and women dead. Forget about the number that are wounded, who came back missing limbs, who came back with wounds that aren't even visible. You spent a lot of capital, but you also spent in blood sons and daughters of America. And the saddest part of all is after all of this is done, there's no exit strategy. You just can't win. We can't even define winning.
The US war in Afghanistan is not only the longest war, one of the most expensive wars, but it's also one of the most invisible wars. We don't hear about it, we don't know about it, we don't think about it. The most important costs of this war are those borne by the people of Afghanistan. They're invisible in the United States. They're invisible to us. They're not invisible to people in Afghanistan.
The powerful truck bomb exploded in Kabul's diplomatic quarter during the packed morning rush hour. The force of the blast so powerful that windows were shattered more than a mile away. People were on the floor and there were streams of blood.
Figures of number of Afghans killed since 2001 of 50,000 to 100,000, but we don't know. We really don't know. No one I know from being in war several times, from my time in Afghanistan and under Afghan society and understanding that rural society, as well as seeing the actions of our forces, seeing the fact that, you know, for every one time that one of our helicopters or our troops killed Afghan civilians, I would swear to it that there are 4 or 5 other instances that are not reported, that don't make the light of public knowledge. We know that within Afghanistan, so many have been made homeless, so many are refugees within their own country, approximately 1 million, maybe more, living in these tent camps, facing starvation year-round, freezing to death in the winter. So the cost has been something that is immeasurable. The psychiatric cost, you have a people of Afghanistan that have lived at war for 45 years, is immense. I mean, the emotional and psychological well-being of the people is just not there. It can't be. The war destroys everything, and I think maybe one of the greatest costs that we're going to see in Afghanistan is basically a post-traumatic stress disorder of a whole people, if and when this war ever comes to an end.
Back here up at 30. Just give me a heads up where you're in from.
So you have no idea right now?
Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh my God! Another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion. My God! It's right in the middle of the building.
This one into the east tower.
Yes. Yes. Right in the middle of the building.
September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today, so that this does not spiral out of control.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
What we saw after 9/11 was absolute fear, absolute paralysis by fear. And people would have supported a leader doing almost anything. That's a very dangerous position to be in. George Bush took advantage of that reality. And when he said, "We will take the world to war," much of the population of this country cheered him on.
American-led military attacks against targets throughout Afghanistan continue tonight. U.S. sources tell NBC News this first round of airstrikes could last 3 or 4 days. The most immediate objective, to disarm and disable the Taliban military, to permit opposition groups to take control. That would make it safer then for U.S. Special Forces to hunt down and root out Osama bin Laden and his terrorist cell.
The bombers were dead. And the notion that 3 weeks later, going to war across the world against a country that had not attacked us, the bombers were not Afghans. They didn't live in Afghanistan, they lived in Hamburg. They didn't train in Afghanistan, they trained in Florida. They didn't go to flight school in Afghanistan, they went to flight school in Minnesota. So what were we doing attacking Afghanistan because they were inspired by somebody living there? The people of Afghanistan were not the ones who attacked us, but they were the ones who paid the price. So in that moment, we saw the beginning of a world war, what the US called the global war on terror. But this was clearly only the first step towards an even greater war that started with the US invasion of Iraq 3 years later. And it's in that context that we have to see the war against Afghanistan. It was an unnecessary war. It was a brutal war against an unknowing population that had no way to respond other than to be the victims of this war. It was a terrible thing.
What we have found in Afghanistan confirms that far from ending there, our war against terror is only beginning. Most of the 19 men who hijacked planes on September the 11th were trained in Afghanistan's camps.
I still remember when President Bush said that we have to defeat Al-Qaeda in who harbored them, which was a big claim. Taliban in many occasions requested the American government and President Bush by itself that please prove if we are part of the crime, if we are accomplices of the 9/11 attack, which was impossible for them to prove.
We went in to the country because of anger, passion, and desire to get some revenge. But at the end of the day, you found yourself in a real quagmire.
When Obama came into office, it was because of a long-standing exhaustion with US wars around the world. Obama had come in as an anti-war candidate. People were desperate for somebody claiming an anti-war mantle to run for office. And Obama did that. If people had listened a little bit more carefully, they would have heard his words a little bit more precisely. He said from the beginning that he was against the war in Iraq. He called it a dumb war. The problem was, Obama didn't think that Afghanistan was a dumb war. He thought Afghanistan was a good war. And the first thing he did in office, militarily, was to send 17,000 additional troops to Afghanistan in the first about 3 months that he was in office.
And as Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan.
9-10 months later, what was announced but a new surge? 30,000 more U.S. troops. So within the first year, before the end of the first year in office, Obama had sent 47,000 new troops to Afghanistan. And the notion that this was an anti-war president was pretty thoroughly rebuked at that point.
He knew, Obama and his entire cabinet knew the massive surge would not succeed. And he did it anyway for political reasons, increased troop strength up to 140,000, including NATO forces, and accomplished absolutely nothing. Guerrilla forces, all they have to do is survive. They don't have to win an outright victory. They don't have to win a single battle. They just have to have dominance where they can, when they can, and then melt away again.
The Taliban fighters think that if they die, they will go to heaven, and if they just survive and defeat the Americans, they will be heroes, and regarded as a hero in the history of Afghanistan. The Taliban leadership has been so smart. They work on the minds of their fighters and their followers because it's not an imposed war, but it's a more a willing war for the Taliban. Of course, the Afghan people do not want to be colonized and controlled by other people or maybe outsiders.
I just think it's important for the American people to understand that this country has seen conflict through the years, and all those years have never really been defeated. And we'd start with Darius I Babylon in 500 BC. Alexander the Great, 323 BC. Mahmud of Ghazni, 11th century. Genghis Khan, 13th century. The Brits in 3 wars, 1838 through 42, 1878 through 80. 1919 through 1921. We recognize Afghanistan in 1934. USSR invades Afghanistan on the 24th of December, 1979, and leaves 10 years later, 1989. And we invade on October 7th, 2001, and we're still there. Do we really think that we're going to win this? When all of those other people fought for years and years, some of them 100 years, 200 years, and weren't able to subjugate that country.
The tunnels tell the story, taking you deep into the mountain where you discover room after room, living quarters, fighting positions, 156 caves in all.
The Afghans have deployed the most powerful defensive weapon in history, a huge network of defensive tunnels, underground labyrinths or mazes, which are the same thing. This extensive labyrinth system has been scarcely mentioned in the mainstream media. When our military forces went into Afghanistan, they knew these labyrinths would be difficult to conquer. They go back in military history to Alexander and his trying to conquer Afghanistan. He was hindered and delayed by underground labyrinths, tunnels carved into the mountains.
Tunnels have played a major role in the resilience of Taliban so far in the last so many years. Guerrilla war always is a hit and run, fight and seek haven, the safe haven for them. For Taliban is the same. Using tunnels is one of the strategy for them because Afghanistan is a restive and inhospitable country.
We continue to follow a developing story out of Afghanistan. The Pentagon confirms the United States has dropped a massive bomb on a series of caves, the so-called mother of all bombs.
We have brought in more and more firepower, but aerial bombing doesn't work. To destroy points, don't get rid of the line, especially when the line can be repaired unseen. To try and destroy the underground caves, tunnels, and labyrinth system is futile.
Trump came into office claiming that he was against stupid wars. He used all kinds of expressions of utter disdain for all the wars. in a way that made some people think that he actually intended to end those wars. But then suddenly, when he was in office, he was ramping up new deployments as well. He surrounded himself with generals. He called them my generals. And when you surround yourself with generals, you're going to get recommendations of military options. You're not going to get diplomatic options. It's the old saying, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. He surrounded himself with military hammers, and every option they gave him was a military option.
The United States military, directed by President Trump and his generals, are dropping an ever-increasing number of bombs on Afghanistan. And yet, the Taliban are now more secure, more able to mount attacks, and more able to control territory than they've been for a decade, leaving many to wonder if the war in the place they call the graveyard of empires will ever come to an end. 5,213 between January 2018 and September, dropped by the United States Air Force. There's been a dramatic increase in the number of munitions falling on Afghanistan since Donald Trump's administration inherited the war from Barack Obama.
We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately.
The using of violence, the using of force, including the mother of all bombs, was just a practice with no result. That started a new commitment in the Taliban's mind to fight so hardly against the American government.
The U.S. Embassy in Kabul, perhaps the most heavily fortified compound in the country, came under a day-long attack as a small unit of Taliban insurgents rained down grenades and machine gun fire from a nearby tower.
The failure has been there for a long time. When I was there, the embassy is split by a road. We were not allowed, and this is in 2009, this is 8 years into the war, we were not allowed to cross that street. You had to take a tunnel under the street to go over to USAID. It was, and you're in the middle of what was called a green zone. You're in the middle of this massive fortified area with like rings of concrete supposedly protecting you, where all the other embassies are, where the Afghan government is, and we still weren't allowed to cross the street to go to USAID. Now it has gotten to the point where they helicopter everywhere. To go to the airport, which is just a couple miles away, they take a helicopter. American officials have to take a helicopter. It is too dangerous to drive the couple miles.
It's just a 5-minute flight. The chopper we boarded was making its 10th trip of the day. A few years ago, American convoys regularly drove on the airport road below. Now, the view from the helicopter window is all most on board will see of Kabul.
I think in the very beginning, we thought, okay, we've pretty much minimized the Taliban so we can just win it militarily. We didn't realize that they will regroup, come back stronger, and hit us harder. So we lost that first couple years where we could have really engaged them in a political fold and left. Of course, year after year, it's been more military focused, attempting to win. Even though we kept losing, we didn't really change that policy. And I think in the recent couple years, it's sort of war exhaustion. Nobody wants to really solve it. They want to kick the can down the road. Obama said on his campaign trail as well, I will end the war in Afghanistan, but he didn't. It was pretty much Bush policy. Name something else, So same thing is happening now with Trump. It's dragged on because I think the will is not there.
I've signed 11,000 letters, and this is the most recent one. It's signed July 3rd, 2018. to honor Staff Sergeant Alexander W. Conrad, who so bravely served his country. I humbly share a quote from a man who eloquently articulated the legacy that our fallen heroes have left behind. He stands in the unbroken line of patriots who have dared to die, that freedom might live and grow and increase its blessings. Freedom lives, and through it he lives, in a way that humbles the undertakings of most men. Franklin D. Roosevelt, may the peace of Christ be with you and your family. And then I sign it. I've really been somewhat embarrassed, to be honest with you, because I made the mistake of voting to send their son and daughter to die for this country. So my retribution to my God was to send the letters. So from my letters since 2004, I get letters back from the families thanking me for my condolence letter. And it really makes me feel guilty that they wrote me back because I should never have sent their child to the war.
To other news now, and a NATO airstrike in northern Afghanistan has killed at least 30 people. The strikes in Kunduz province were conducted to protect US and Afghan special forces who'd been on a raid to capture Taliban fighters.
In a city where death is all around, the people living here can still be shocked and left broken-hearted. This sustained attack left dozens dead and many injured. Babies were among those killed.
Why does the Pentagon continue with this ghoulish charade? And the answer is money. The answer is the munitions, and military contractors are making billions and even finally trillions of dollars from this war. It's in the interest of the munitions people, the military-industrial complex, to continue the war because of profit.
Dwight Eisenhower, one of our great generals, one of our great presidents, made the statement when he left office as a president: beware of the military-industrial complex. We're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on warfare, and I think it's just gotten to a point that most members of Congress, especially my party, the Republican Party, just see this as the way you do business. In America today, we raise a lot of money based on our system to spend in campaigns.
It's a very rough time, but I remember after 9/11 talking to you way back in 2001 or 2, I felt that the American intervention was the best thing that had happened to Afghanistan in the 20 years then that I'd been following. And I still believe that.
You simply look at the IRS receipts, for the donors to the major think tanks in Washington, D.C. And they're all supplied, with their finance by Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and their business is writing up papers full of excuses for conflict. It's as simple as that. So these arms manufacturers take our tax money, they invest the smallest proportion of it back in these excuse-making factories, these think tanks, and then When the policies are implemented, they cash checks for tens of billions of dollars. It's the greatest racket in world history, really.
Okay, this is not government incompetence. I think it's corruption. Remember that gas station? We were first told it cost $43 million. It should only have cost about $500,000, and now at a Senate hearing yesterday, we learned the Pentagon has no idea how much was actually spent, and the Pentagon is actually now doing a little bit of backpedaling, saying the gas station only cost $10 million, as if paying $10 million for a $500,000 gas station to somehow make us feel better. And that, of course, is just the tip of the very big iceberg. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Construction, John Sopko, goes on the record. Good evening, sir.
Pleasure to see you.
And you testified there yesterday. You were the one who's trying to see what the Pentagon's doing with its money over there. So first question is the Pentagon cooperating fully?
We're hoping. Up to now, no.
We know that all this money, this $100 billion that was spent on developing Afghanistan by the American government, it's all been an encyclopedia of lies. We've seen that the schools that supposedly were built were not built. We've seen that the healthcare centers that were supposedly built were not built. We know this because there's a Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, and he has investigated all these things, and he has found that these schools, these healthcare facilities, all these institutions that were supposedly built at the cost of $100 billion were not built. That money just went into American corporations' pockets and the pockets of corrupt Afghan officials.
Paying for reconstruction in war-ravaged countries is an American tradition. After World War II, there was the Marshall Plan, named after Secretary of State George Marshall. The U.S. spent, in today's terms, $103 billion over 4 years to rebuild 16 European countries. Today, U.S. taxpayers have now far outspent the Marshall Plan on Afghanistan reconstruction.
Well, counting $125 billion that's spent on development process in Afghanistan has been a failed practice. Afghanistan is a small country. Spending $125 billion on Afghanistan's reconstruction. Afghanistan should have been equivalent now to one of the Arabian countries or Middle Eastern countries. Still, many people in Afghanistan sleep in the dark. Still, 10,000 kilometers roads are paved, which are cracked again, and still there are 45,000 more roads to be paved.
$125 billion just disappeared in Afghanistan over a couple of years. And they not only didn't know where it went, it didn't seem to have had any impact on what they were doing. So they could lose $125 billion and not have any effect on this already failed process that was underway. It was such a good piece of evidence of how this whole process was failing.
It is the most unintended and awkward consequence of our military offensive here in Afghanistan. The rout by our Marines of the Taliban from their former stronghold here in Helmand Province has put us in the weird position of being protectors of the largest crop of opium in the world.
Thanks, Geraldo. And guess what, guys? The Taliban had banned and almost completely eradicated opium in Afghanistan shortly before the U.S. invaded. Just look at these headlines. The corporate media was even lauding the Taliban's success. Fast forward to today, where over 90% of the world's heroin originates from the war-torn country. According to a report from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, this year saw opium production surge to a record high. The report said that the harvest this May resulted in 5,500 metric tons of opium, 49% higher than last year, and more than the combined output of the rest of the world. Wow, that's a lot of heroin and a lot of money being made.
The real scandal is so much bigger. The real scandal is that the entire state of Afghanistan is a narco state. They try to say that the Taliban is financed almost purely by heroin profits, which is really not the case. And yet the entire governmental structure of Afghanistan is supported by heroin money. The unofficial, I guess, warlord ruling over Kandahar city for more than a decade was Wali Karzai, the half-brother of Hamid Karzai, the president, and he was the biggest heroin kingpin in the country. And when General McChrystal and Mike Flynn, his right-hand man, came in, General Flynn, they wanted to kill him. Flynn called him Al Capone and said, this guy's got to go. And the CIA said, no, you don't. This guy works for us. And his death squads, take care of enemies that we need. And we get good intelligence from him. And so you're going to back off. And so the generals back down and let him stay. Even the New York Times version has it that virtually every governor, every mayor, every police chief, every parliamentarian in the country, every real power monger in the country is involved in the heroin business. And so then what that means is everyone who has political power there is dependent on their foreign donors for the money coming in. And then so what that also means then, and even in all the reconstruction money, all that reconstruction money goes to foreign firms, doesn't even go to local firms and local workers to even do the work. And so you have, massive mansions, owned by opium dealers and owned by basically warlords in charge of distributing American aid. And then you have all the people who never see it.
Corruption in drug has been the two major reason why the war has been so long. Some people say it's $85 billion bonanza in Afghanistan. $5 billion are going to inside mafia, drug mafia. $1 billion from drug is going to the pocket of the farmers. I think $500 million were annually coming to the pocket of the Taliban to fight against the Americans. Yes, I can say corruption in drug has been the big reasons and factors that continue the war for the last 18 years. And it will continue for 100 years if we do not address corruption in drug.
The peace marchers, ages 17 to 71, they're Afghans from Helmand province, from Kandahar, from Herat. They basically marched to Kabul, and along the way, the stops they made in other provinces, they hugged other Afghans. They asked them, let's not fight anymore. Let's, end this war. It's not in the benefit of any one of us. And what you see is that Afghans are just so burnt out and feel failed by not only their government, the insurgents clearly, and the outside actors that are involved in Afghanistan, that they took it in their own hands to say, hey, we want peace. We've had enough. We've suffered enough. We've bled enough. Enough of our sons and daughters and mothers, fathers, brothers, whatever, have died. And we want to end this for other generations. This is not politicians. This is not backed by any group. This is just local Afghans deciding, what, we've had enough of this bloodshed in our country and we need to bring peace. So they got a lot of support across the country. There was a 3-day ceasefire that the Afghan government and the Taliban agreed to. The Afghan government extended it. They wanted a 10-day, but they were able to get a 3-day ceasefire. And that's very hopeful. That has not happened in 17 years. So the thing now is, do we support that, or do we continue with the mindset of we're going to win this militarily?
This week, Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani flew to Geneva for a UN conference with the aim of finding a political solution to the 17-year conflict.
We call on the Taliban to commit to a ceasefire and appoint an authoritative negotiating team.
So in 17 years, you've just had this, yes, we had intensified fighting, but now you've had a stalemate and people want to talk. Both the civilians are ready and the fighting factions are ready and the Afghan government's ready. The question is not the Afghans. The question is the outsiders. That's the region, the regional actors, and the American government, because we have the most forces on the ground, and we have to be also willing to talk. And I believe once you start a dialogue, things change. And that is the reason you get into dialogue, because you hear the other person and you come to compromises. And that's how peace happens. It doesn't happen by shooting at soldiers or shooting at Taliban. It doesn't happen that way.
There's always hope because, as we know, every war ultimately ends with some kind of negotiated arrangement. The question is, how long does the fighting go on? And how many people have to be killed first before you get there? Trying to do talks while the fighting is underway is difficult, but this would not be the first time that people have tried it. It's not clear how far they will go. It's not clear which ones of them will ultimately lead to a negotiated solution. But what all sides have said from the beginning, before so many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Afghans were killed, all sides have agreed there will have to be talks. There will have to be a political solution to end this war.
In Afghanistan, my administration is holding constructive talks with a number of Afghan groups, including the Taliban. As we make progress in these negotiations, we will be able to reduce our troops' presence and focus on counter-terrorism. We do not know whether we'll achieve an agreement, but we do know that after 2 decades of war, the hour has come to at least try for peace, and the other side would like to do the same thing. It's time.
The war in Afghanistan has dragged on for 17 years. Previous attempts to end the fighting through diplomacy have failed. But over the past week, high-level officials from the United States and the Taliban have been meeting in Doha. As John Yang reports, they've made significant progress in hammering out an agreement to start the process of ending the war.
The possible breakthrough comes amid escalating Taliban attacks. The chief U.S. negotiator, Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, tells the New York Times that the militants have agreed in principle to a draft framework of a deal.
The Taliban has long said that their only condition, their main condition, has been the removal of foreign troops from Afghanistan. So you begin a process of pulling the foreign troops out of the Pashtun areas in the south and the east. Doesn't mean you pull them completely out of Afghanistan, you pull them out of the south and the east. And then you move forward from there. You work forward with this ceasefire, with this removal of foreign troops. You move into negotiations. The area that the Taliban control now, which they control anyhow, let them control it. And eventually come to some form of agreement, some form of intermediate government. So create some kind of parliamentary system. But the main thing is ceasefires, get the Americans and the NATO forces out of the areas where they're unwanted, and build on that with negotiations. And what we really need is that outside powers not be involved. So if the Pakistanis or the Indians or the Iranians or the Americans or the Russians or whoever are sending weapons in, then there are sanctions against those countries. There are things to make sure that Afghanistan is allowed to be neutral and allowed to fix and heal itself. That is the only way forward. That is the only way it happens, is when the outside powers stop being involved in Afghanistan, because that's what's fueling it.
Afghans eager to learn more about the peace talks between the US and the Taliban.
We are very hopeful. All the Afghans are tired of war, explosion and suicide attack in this country. They are hoping for a brighter future, and I am very hopeful that these talks will bring a bright future for us and for the future of Afghanistan.
We Afghans don't trust groups affiliated with foreign intelligence agencies. The US must talk with the Afghan people, because we are the ones who suffer. This is not peace. What kind of peace is this?
Peace process is very complex and very tedious thing. We should not be expecting that the peace deal will happen overnight. We have to be very patient. I'm optimistic for that. Things are going very well. We have to make sure that the Taliban are meeting or visiting, talking directly with the Afghan government. So far, the Afghan government has been sidelined by the Taliban leadership, but the American government in the regional countries should ensure that they will convince Taliban that they have to talk with the Afghan government face to face.
One of the problems that all of these various peace processes face is that all of them have largely excluded Afghan civil society. There's been the sense that this is a military problem, the military will deal with it. Oh yeah, we sort of need to deal with governments, so yeah, the US government and maybe at some point the Afghan government will be involved. But Afghan society is not just that. Afghan society has women who are systematically excluded from virtually all of these processes. It has doctors, it has lawyers, it has trade unions, it has farmers. The farmers of Afghanistan play an enormous role in society because it's such an agricultural society. They are among the most important leaders. The religious leaders, who the US would like to ignore altogether because they don't represent our brand of Islam or our brand of religious leadership, but they are the key credible leaders in the villages and towns and regions of Afghanistan. The tribal leaders, US again doesn't like to acknowledge that there are these tribal differences. There are huge roles that the tribal leadership play all over the country, and to exclude them pretty much guarantees that the talks will fail.
Joining me now is Eric Prince, a former Navy SEAL, the founder of Blackwater, the former firm that had faced years of investigations for its role in Iraq. It no longer exists. He has now launched a new security organization, and he's pushing for the privatization of the war in Afghanistan. Mr. Prince, thank you. Thank you for being here. What would be the advantages of privatizing, given all the objections from the Pentagon, from the State Department, from the rest of the military?
First of all, privatization is a loaded term, right?
Okay.
Right now there's 15,000 U.S. troops and another 30,000 contractors. My plan would say 2,000 U.S. Special Forces remain and about 6,000 contractors. So by any stretch, that is a severe reduction in manpower and certainly in spending.
Well, you cannot close one wound by opening another. The American government should be the surgeon now, and they have to stop the bleeding. Now, it's an option for Americans whether they continue war in Afghanistan or whether they bring peace and make history and make everybody very happy. Privatization of war is not an option at all. It's the worst decision because now we're in the middle of peace and negotiation. Even though spreading out this news, that can destroy the motive and the momentum that has been already created among the Taliban and the Afghan leadership. So forget about it. We should not talk about it. It's not an option. And privatization of war in this very sensitive situation, even the announcement can destroy the hope and can destroy the optimism toward a bright and prosperous future.
Senator Lindsey Graham is on a mission to connect with the troops, but also a mission to convince a president that after 17 years, Afghanistan is still a fight worth fighting.
This is the center of gravity. This is the place where it all started. If we're driven out of Afghanistan, if America is beaten after having spent all these years and this much blood and treasure, every jihadist throughout the world will be on steroids.
What would happen if President Trump decides to pull everybody out tomorrow?
This place would fall apart. We could, if we make the same decision we did in Iraq, leave too soon, set in motion chaos that would make Iraq look like a walk in the park. And I think one of the most likely outcomes would be a second 9/11 coming our way.
Let the Afghans try to work it out. If you want to have some of the other countries to sit in on the negotiation, that's fine too. But for goodness sakes, don't think that you're going to change Afghanistan militarily, because history has proven it's not going to happen. I don't think you will ever make the major changes that need to be made unless you start reducing the size of the American military. Give the Taliban their leadership, give Gandhi and his leadership a chance to negotiate. If that can't happen, then try, because I don't think America can dictate in a foreign country, and especially in Afghanistan. To me, you can have diplomatic influence if you remove your military presence and give the Afghans a chance to negotiate. I don't think you can do it as long as you got troops in uniform walking around Kabul and these other parts of the country.
The American government should ensure a power sharing with the Taliban after a peace deal. It should be a responsible exit. We have to be still a country that should not be a liability for American for 100 years. Americans should stay in Afghanistan in diplomatic ways, and there should be a two-way interest that have to be safeguarded by by Afghans and by the Afghan government. So as long as there is peace, as long as there are power sharing between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and as long as the American government leave Afghanistan in a friendly way, not in a hostile way, it's a win-win situation, and I hope that will happen in the coming months.
I think that what we need to do now is to establish our ultimate goal and objective at this stage after some 17 years of conflict, develop an exit strategy that takes us out of Afghanistan in such a way that we're safe doing it, that we leave the country at least as unspoiled as we can, and if you're going to leave a residual force, that you better have a very clear goal for them, very clear limits to what they can do or cannot do. And if those limits are violated by the government or anybody else, then have the courage to just say, that's it, we're totally out. We send our people over there and they demonstrate remarkable courage. What we need now is courage from our government to recognize where we are and to take appropriate action. And that's not to reinforce failure.
We know that Afghanistan has long been known as the graveyard of empires. 30 years ago, the Soviet Union pulled out the last of its troops after failing to defeat the Afghans. The US failed long ago to defeat the Afghans, but they've continued fighting. The US hopefully will pull out its troops soon, and hopefully Afghanistan will be allowed to emerge as a country rather than as a graveyard of other people's empires.
For Americans to withdraw from Afghanistan is not a reason for shame. This is not about America. In fact, this is where American exceptionalism gets us into trouble. The shame is to deny the reality of the situation and spend trillions of dollars and waste precious lives. Call a spade a spade. The war now is a question of profit. The way the public pays for that profit is with the lives of young people. And it's outrageous and disgusting. So what we need to do is bring pressure on our public officials to end the war.
The poison of violence will become not only the language of power, but the language of opposition. And those who resist here today with nonviolence are the last thin line of defense between a civil society and its disintegration.
I've been out of the military now for 2.5 years, and I've been speaking out ever since. And today, I just felt that it was time for me to take a stand. You know, risk arrest, whatever.
We say fight back! They say get back! We say fight back! They say get back!
Hope posits that people are drawn to the good by the good. This is the secret of hope's power.
We who are appalled by the war, we need to organize and bring political pressure to stop this. It's the job of people against the war to spread the word and eventually persuade soldiers of all different ranks that this war is not winnable, and it's time to end the war and withdraw.
To me, I feel, after all the taxpayer money that's gone from, as an American, to the Afghan conflict in hope of a solution or resolution or winning the war, the troops that have paid with their lives, the troops that have come back handicapped, the families that have suffered, as an American, the honorable exit is to honor their sacrifice. That would mean that you bring peace to the country so that those lives were not lost in vain. And same thing with the Afghan side. I'm sorry, I never get emotional, but today I am. Maybe it's just watching year after year the losses on both sides. I identify with both sides. I am an Afghan, I was born in Kabul, I'm also American. And I understand that both sides are really losing, but nobody's paying attention. And unfortunately, we're continuing this kind of war profiteering around the world. There is a sector that benefits. And it's very unfortunate because, they're looking at their profit while other people are losing their lives. So we have to really look at it morally at this point. 17 years, that's enough. That is the longest war. We shouldn't make it an endless war. So to me, an honorable exit is do the right thing and leave.